that the fusiform isn't broken, it just hadn't been kind of utilized in the same way as in typical kids. So I think this is just a nice finding that their brains are not broken, they're just not being used in the same way. And with kind of some training, with a motivating technique like PRT, it seems like we're able to kind of boost activation in these areas. And so going into a couple of the other regions we found, and I won't go into the kind of their long names for you all, but one is the PSTS, and this is another region that's been found to be active in differentiating biological versus non-biological motion. It's also been found to be involved in kind of higher level social processing, so kind of figuring out intentions of others. So it was nice that we saw an increased activation here. And interestingly, in that previous research I was talking about, they had kind of found kind of correlation between activation in the PSTS and level of social deficits in kids with autism. So what they found was higher activation in the PSTS was associated with less social deficits. And so what we can kind of hypothesize is going on with our kids in this study is that with increased activation in the PSTS, perhaps this is reflecting that kind of decreased level of social deficit after intervention, which is pretty exciting. Another region, VLPFC, so this is a frontal region, also involved in kind of social processing. In the previous study I just mentioned, also found a correlation with this region. And in this region we found that with higher activation, it was associated with more social responsiveness in our typically developing kids. So this is great, right? Now we see increased activation in this region in our kids with autism after intervention, so perhaps this is because of their kind of increased social responsiveness. And responsivity was something that we were really targeting with these kids. So that's, again, pretty exciting. Similar finding with another kind of set of frontal regions is that they found in the prior research that higher activation in this region was again associated with more social responsiveness in the typically developing kids. So the fact that our kids with autism after intervention are showing increased activation in this area is really exciting because it kind of suggests that they're becoming more socially responsive behaviorally, and we're seeing it also in the brain. And so I think this is kind of interesting altogether because not only are we seeing increased activation in brain regions that simply differentiate human and non-human motion, but also brain regions that are working kind of on higher level social processing, so kind of intention states and sort of more theory of mind things. So this is exciting for us too. Okay, well, that looks okay now. Okay. So kind of conclusions. So as we might have expected, after pivotal response treatment, we see positive behavioral improvements in our kids with autism. And we see this from direct behavioral observation, from parent report, and also from those more kind of standardized measures. And we see kind of increased activation in social brain regions that are recruited by typically developing kids after our kids go through pivotal response treatment. So this is really exciting because if you can imagine that typical kids are kind of on one path, right, and our kids with autism are sort of veering off a little bit. And what we're seeing is not that they're taking a different path, but they're coming closer to that typical path of development. And these kids are 5 now, and you can imagine what kind of the lessening of the gap between the typical developing kids and the kids with ASD, how that's really going to help them as they continue to kind of develop. So that's pretty exciting. And also, the fact that these results really suggest that the neural systems that are kind of supporting and underlying low-level social perception are malleable in children with autism. These systems are not broken. They're just not being recruited in the same way. And kind of like I mentioned, it seems as if a kind of motivating behavioral intervention like pivotal response treatment is able to bring about kind of these changes in the way our kids process social stimuli. And I talked about the brain trajectory, so that's exciting. And then in terms of future directions, so more data. We have 5 kids, which is exciting, but not quite enough to really be doing large group designs here. And luckily, I was lucky enough to receive a fellowship from Autism Speaks. So we're going to be starting to collect data here at UCSB. So do a quick plug for anyone who's in the area with a kid between 4 and 6 that's interested in kind of, getting involved in this. You can give me a call. So with kind of these increased numbers, there are a bunch of questions that we're interested in answering. And we're just trying to figure out, are specific areas of the brain, and more importantly the social brain, associated with these positive sort of behavioral changes after clinical response treatment. And then can we kind of correlate behavioral changes with changes in the way that our kids are processing social stimuli? So do certain kind of brain responses correlate to certain behavioral changes? And then kind of taking this idea from that literature with the adults with depression, can we kind of predict behavioral changes from brain responses